Okay, so I have not sold any Microsoft products today, but as you can see, PowerPoint for Mac is just as unstable as PowerPoint for anything else. But now that we're up and going, quick little introduction. I do have a lot of slides to go through today. I will do my best to get through everything at a decent pace. We do have a break afterwards, so if I do run up until break time, I will be available for questions as you're getting your coffee. So, quick introduction about me. My name is Valerie. I work for a company called SecureCon, based out of the Washington, D.C. area in the States. We do a lot of general software penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, a lot of things like that. We do a lot of critical infrastructure work as well. So, during a month, I usually spend time in substations and office buildings and lots of different places in between. So this talk is kind of a collection of all of the physical access issues that I've seen across all of the industries, and I've tried to bring them in together in a way that makes sense for more of IT folks for this audience. So I started in the IT background, so I'm not a physical security expert. But with these systems, I kept seeing these mistakes and these problems during our assessments. So I decided to really start exploring that avenue a little bit more. So for today, we'll talk really quick about what exactly a physical access system is and why we found that to be interesting. Why they're insecure. So it sounds kind of basic, but a lot of what you're going to see here today will be very basic for IT security. But it is new to the physical security world. So we definitely have a long road ahead of us when it comes to securing physical access systems across all of the components. So what does that mean exactly? So a physical access system is basically a collection of controls that will either permit or deny access into a restricted area. Pretty general. So some easy examples are when you go to the train station and you slip your ticket or touch your NFC card to the turnstile, and it either allows or denies entry with that really rude beep. That's an example of a physical access system. So a lot of the same components and the same principles will apply when you're putting that into use at, say, the airport, allowing entry to places like the flight line and other important areas. Same with building security. So while some of these systems look a little bit different on the surface, underneath, they're very, very similar. So I'm going to go through the pieces very quickly, just so that we all have a base understanding of the terminology that's used here. One of the problems that we have between the IT security and physical security world is we don't speak a common language. What we say one way, they take another. So the basics, access control point. So when we hear that, that's basically the point where you're either going to be permitted or denied. So that's a door, that's a turnstile, a gate. The way that that is permitted or denied is through a credential reader. Little boxes, they look like this. You see them, even if you just walk the streets here, you'll see them along apartment buildings, parking garages, lots and lots and lots of places. And we present to them what we call a credential. So IT folks, we always tend to think of that as the card, as your badge that you wear to work during the day. But they can come in many different forms. Some of them actually have NFC tags that can be used on your telephone. And some of them have small keychain tags like this. A lot of fitness clubs in the States will use these keychains. But it's the same technology that's inside of the card. So just because the credential may look different on the outside, on the inside, it's still the same. So for this talk, I don't want to focus just on access cards. So we're going to look at the entire system as a whole to really find out where the weak points normally are. But it is important that we go over some of the basics of the access cards so that you understand how they work and how the data is written. So inside of these are these tiny little coils wound up. I usually bring some clear ones with me, but I forgot them this trip, so sorry. Have to make do with the photo. basically we have two general types of credentials. We have high frequency and we have low frequency. The low frequency is more of the older version. It's been around for a long time. It's very cheap. It's easy to deploy. It's very, very insecure. There's a little bit of data that you can put on these tags, and it doesn't leave a whole lot of space for extra things like checksums and encryption and good security things that we as security people like to see. So once we get into the part where we start reading and cloning these tags, they're very, very easy to do so. And at least in the States, about 80% of the physical access systems on the market right now still use this technology. So it's not going away. I know there's been a lot of focus kind of moving from the proximity technology to really attacking some of the high frequency stuff. But as we'll talk about later on, they still intertwine quite often. So just because it's not new does not mean that it isn't a threat. High frequency cards, instead of operating at 125 kilohertz, now we're into megahertz, right? So 13.56 megahertz gives us a lot more space to put a whole lot more data on that credential or that card. Sometimes it's encrypted, sometimes it's not. Physical access companies aren't exactly security companies. So what I mean by that is, in this example, I've basically shown how the data is written on the card across the wavelength. Those of you who are RF people, these are not proper wavelengths, so don't bother trying to figure out, why that isn't right. Just for example's sake. So on our top one, we see our 125 kilohertz card. So that frequency is slow, right? And that's the other reason that we can't put a lot of data on there. It won't fit, and then it will take too long for that wave pattern to get through to be decoded on the other side. So if we look at our facility code and our card number, those are kind of our two important pieces when it comes to physical access credentials that we need to worry about. It's very similar to a credit card and expiration date. Once we have those numbers, we can start to format those numbers in different ways on different tags. So if you notice here in the top example, everything is straight across, all in order. So our facility code comes first, followed by our card number. And then on the bottom example, it's the same thing, but it gets sent much faster. The vendors in the physical access community decided that they weren't really worried so much about security at this point. It was more about locking in their clients. So they'll take that data and they will pad it, basically, and write it to different places in the data stream. So the vendor A's card will not work on vendor B's system, just so that they can lock them into only purchasing their credentials from that vendor. But once we start to look at the hardware and how it's actually written to the chip inside of the card, it's the same. So a lot of my clients struggle with this a lot because they don't understand. They keep being told that they have their own custom format. So this is definitely a security by obscurity thing that started many, many years ago in the physical access community. And it's just now starting to kind of become public that that's what's happening. So the rest of the pieces, right, because it doesn't stop once we present our card to the reader. When we present our card to the reader provides power, and that's how the chip is powered on so that the data can be read and exchanged between the card and the reader. But on the back side of that reader, we have quite a few things that go along with. We have a door controller that's a single board computer. It's not very intelligent. Most of them have a full TCP/IP stack on the Ethernet side, but not always. And these are very delicate systems. So what the controller does is it basically interprets that data. So the reader itself is pretty dumb without the brain behind it. The exchange between those two happens on copper, though, not Ethernet. So that's something very important that we as IT people need to understand. The controller gets all of its commands and all of its settings from the mothership, right? So the access control server, in this case, it's usually a Windows 2012 box somewhere in the server farm. So at least that part, we're pretty familiar with that part and how that works. So if we map that, this is basically how the process will work. We present the card to the reader, The reader will just basically pass that information along over to the controller on copper, right? So it uses a protocol called WIGAND or WIGAND, and it just relays that data over. Now, the controller is really what's going to make the decision whether that card is going to be allowed or denied into that access control area. And the controller gets all of its stuff from the access server. The controllers can be scaled because they can't hold very many inputs. So if we look at it from just a single perspective, it looks very basic. But once you start getting into multiple floors and multiple levels of the building, and you bring in things like elevators, it's a lot of inputs, and the controllers are pretty limited, even with buying the expansion pack. So you're talking about, you probably have at least 10 to 15 controllers in a 5 to 8-story building. So it's definitely not just one device that's sitting in the closet somewhere. We have 15 devices that are in closets and under desks and in all random areas of the building. Enough topology. I'm done with topology. Okay, so why this is a problem. We understand the basics and sort of how the pieces work together, but as IT people, we're pretty familiar with the bigger picture of how these systems work, not so much on the physical security side. And I really like this slide. It's not an exact fit for this situation, but a lot of the same principles apply. So when we tell somebody that we work in physical security, usually that reaction is, oh, well, that's okay. I mean, you're in school, right? You're going to get a better job someday. But if you tell somebody that you're in computer security, you get the, wow, you must be really smart. But at the end of the day, we're protecting the same assets, same data, same inputs, same outputs. And as we all know, in the IT world, physical access is king. If I can get to it, then the rest of the controls that are in place really don't matter. So we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of it's going to begin with education on the physical security side. They're probably a good, solid 15 years behind us when it comes to the way that they think about security and they think about technology. The gap between those is really closing, though, because they depend on these systems to do most of the access control for them, but they don't understand the requirements for them and how they work and why they work or don't work. At this point, it's, well, the computer handles that. Okay, well, who programmed the computer? Oh, we don't know. Maybe the vendor, possibly. But it works. The computer handles it. So we have a lot of education to do through example, and that's kind of been a long road so far, and it's going to take a while to correct. A great example that I like to use for this, side story. Usually when we're presenting findings at the end of an engagement, we'll have physical security, network security, and then IT security in the room with us. Now, the 3 leaders of those groups are not usually 3 people that hang out together. Right? They might know where that guy sits, but that's about it. But when you configure a physical access system, it requires a lot of connectivity, yes? So when they set this thing up, they didn't really have an architect in place who really understood what was supposed to happen and how it was supposed to work. So usually the physical access folks are in charge of obtaining all the things that they need on the network side for the vendor that comes in to install. So the head of physical security will call the network security guy and say, hey, I need, as he flips through the manual, a VLAN. Yes, we need a VLAN for our stuff. The network guy sets it up. Okay, no problem. Here's your /24. This is all yours. You're good to go. But it's a routable VLAN everywhere. So when we can find all these components on the internal network, or sometimes the external network, and we present that, it doesn't quite come through on the physical security side. So then physical security guy is mad. He's like, no, you can't see those. We have a VLAN. And then I say, yes, but it's a routable VLAN. And the network guy looks at me and he's like, well, he didn't say that he needed ACLs. Okay, that's fine. And then physical security guy is like, what are ACLs? So we as IT security are probably going to have to start helping fill that gap a little bit when it comes to these enterprise deployments. think we've talked enough about culture. Let's move on. So not only do we have a culture problem and a legacy, let's say, problem in this industry, we also have a very large vendor problem. And yes, I know, blame the vendor, but it's not always the vendor. In this case, the vendor made a really big boo-boo. So one of the reasons that these systems are very insecure is they're designed by folks who don't understand IT security. We've already been through that. A handful of years ago, HID Global, the largest distributor in access control technology, decided that they were going to fix the proximity program, and they were going to encrypt everything. Sounded pretty good in theory, but they didn't really understand how crypto worked, and instead of bringing in somebody who was an expert at crypto, they decided that they would just roll their own. I don't know of a good vendor story that starts with, we're just going to use our own crypto, that ends well. I have not heard one yet. So if you do have one, please let me know, and I'll recant that statement. So what they did was they found a really great key, basically, to sign all their stuff with, but they signed it all with the same private key, and then deployed everything into the world. Right? So we all know how private and public keys work. So once you have the private key, you have literally the keys to the kingdom. And unfortunately, these kingdoms are everywhere. So now HID has a problem of, okay, we sold all of these companies and governments and industries these secure encrypted systems, but they're not really so secure anymore now that everybody knows the private key. So they've done some work on that, but it's still not to the level that it needs to be. So I'm not going to get too much into that because there's a lot of detail in math, and we've already had lunch and nobody wants to do math right now. But if you do have questions on it, I'll be happy to give you some reference material later. So just a little example there. So let's look at how we put all of the attack surfaces together, because as a red team member, when we come in to do an assessment, we just want complete takeover. So there are definitely multiple ways to get that. And we also have to look at securing physical access systems the same way that we look at securing IT systems. Same thing. So we're going to go through each of these attack surfaces, some of the exploits for them. Some of these pieces, some of these tools, you'll have heard of some, others maybe not as much. Some of these are a little older. Proxmark 3, anybody who's into that kind of research probably has one of these. It is a research tool for various RFID things, not just access cards. It's pretty small, this one. This is the older model. It's about the size of like an SSD. So, about palm size. The problem with it is that it still needs power and it still needs an external antenna based on the type of card that you're trying to target. So once you get all of that stuff together, you can't really carry it very well. I have very short arms, so some of the guys would put that in their inside pocket and then run the cable down their arm and put the antenna in their hand, but I have small hands too, so the antenna doesn't fit in my hand because it's about the size of a CD. So I had to come up with some other ways to try to figure out how we were going to do some skimming attacks in the field with this. So my first attempt at that was the RFID binder of doom. It looks pretty normal, and it was until I emptied it out and put all the goodies inside. So you'll see the Proxmark 3 is there. It's literally just held on there with some Velcro. In physical security testing, we use a lot of very sophisticated pieces, stuff like Velcro. Just a power supply up there top. It's just one of those mobile cell phone chargers. Throw the cable along the bottom, and then on the other side we have our antenna, literally, and a CD holder, because they're that similar in size. So once you zip it up, you can walk around with it on the street and then try to get close enough to somebody's card to be able to read that content. There are a few problems with that. The Proxmark 3 is not meant to be used in the field. It's really just meant to be on somebody's desk. So your read range is a couple centimeters, not very much. It's very awkward to get that close to somebody to be able to read that data without being very obvious about it. Even for a woman, it's very obvious. So the binder was an attempt at that, because as you're talking to people, you can kind of let it fall a little bit, because their badge is probably, about lower chest level, kind of like our conference badges here. But the leather in the binder prevented the card from getting really good power, so I didn't get a lot of good reads with it. So attempt number 2 was the Grid-It. The Grid-It is a wonderful invention if you've never used one. It holds everything in place. So for us Mac people that have to have 15 adapters with us everywhere we go, it holds everything in that same spot, and you can just pull it in and out of your bag. It also holds everything in the same spot for the Proxmark 3. So basically, once you get it all set up like this, we take it and we put it inside of a laptop sleeve. And then if we're on the street trying to get our reads from unsuspecting employees on the street, it gives you some flexibility with it. You can kind of swing it beside you as you walk, kind of hold it out a little bit and run into somebody as you're crossing opposite sides of the street. But again, it's very clunky. We've made it work in the past, but it was not very easy to do. So definitely a better way. A couple of years ago, some of the folks over at Bishop Fox and some other research folks came out with some longer range tools. So this is fantastic because now we went from a couple of centimeters to about a 2 to 3 feet read range. It's a lot easier to get within 2 feet of somebody than it is to get within a couple of centimeters of somebody. It's expensive, though. The reader itself is pretty costly. Depending on the technology that you want to target, the long-range reader is usually about $400, $500. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the design, just the basics. I've got everything referenced in here, so when you guys grab the slides online, it has all the reference links and stuff in it already, so no need to worry about jotting it down. So basically, it takes the output from the reader itself and uses the Arduino. It writes all of the card content and the facility code on the micro SD, saves it in a flat text file on the device. So instead of trying to go out and get 1, 2 reads on the Proxmark, because the Proxmark can only hold 2 on a good day, it pulls the cable and turn off the power. With this, you can be out for a couple of hours and just constantly collect card data, and then it will be on the micro SD when you get back to whatever coffee shop, hotel room vehicle that you're using for your base station at that time. So it's kind of what it looks like on the inside here. Yes, that's a lot of batteries. No, it doesn't last very long. I went through a lot of batteries in this design. Text file looks like this, right? Basically tells us the length of our card, content, facility code, the card number, and then the binary. Reference link there for you. Design 2, some folks at DerbyCon presented this a couple of years ago. It uses a lot of the same technologies, but they use an external battery pack with it so that you don't have to constantly go out and buy AA batteries. This was a great idea. They've also added the Bluetooth module, which is the little red box up there, so you can actually sync the app with your phone. And that's really important because when you're out walking around trying to get reads from somebody, you really need a timestamp to have a good idea of what card belongs to who. So if I know that I was kind of close to the security guard at 1 p.m., all I need to do is just go back and look at the log on my phone, or just kind of wait to feel it buzz to know that I got a read for them. And that's, you know, a better card probably than the random ones that I got on the street. So put a reference link in there for the power supply that you need. It has to have a 12-volt output. If you have questions, just send me an email. Okay, let's go back to lower tech. Like I said, physical security attacks are not always high tech. So most of the vendors will print the card number on the card. On the card. That's like us writing our password on the back of our badge and never changing it. And walking around on the train and everywhere else with our password flashed to the world. Same principle applies here. The facility code is not on there, but it's 99% of the time the same facility code for that company everywhere. So once you have it, then all you need are card numbers. They also put it on the box that the cards come in, you know, for reference. So we have some pretty good social engineering opportunities here as well. If we can call and get them to read us the number back on the box from their last set that they used, because we need to restock their stuff, then we already have a good starting point. If we look at the reader itself, so I mentioned before, you know, the reader is not very smart. And it also has that copper connection on the back. We can use this to our advantage. So the BLEKey came out 2 years ago, I think, at Black Hat. And the guys who did it basically made it so that it goes in line with a device. So you just pull it out from the wall a little bit, and the copper wires are exposed. And you take the device and you put it between the 3 copper wires that you need. It's very easy. It gets its power from one of those wires, and its data on data 0 and data 1. And it would basically just man in the middle until you come back to get it. So it's also writing all of the data to a micro SD, but you can also sync it with your phone. So you can do a replay attack with this device as long as you're within Bluetooth range of where that device is. So if I watch somebody go into the door and I see that it unlocked, all I have to do is just press the button for the replay attack on my phone, and it will open the door as if that person scanned in as well. Pretty neat. And they're Canadian, so that's why they have the Canadian coin for reference. Resources are there. It's not very expensive. It's very useful. I highly recommend looking into it. Request to exit devices. I love these things. So these are usually on doors with a card reader on one side, but not necessarily a card reader on the other. They're very annoying once you kind of tune into them because they click as you approach the door. The motion sensor will trip, and then it will unlock the door so that you can exit without having to exit scan to release the door. In physical access, they call that a REX. What's cool is when they're on doors like this with a big old gap in between them, we can do lots of cool things with that. So back to the expensive tools, coat hanger. I like the We Love Our Customers coat hanger because I gotta put the picture in the report anyway, so I might as well make it a good one. They're never as amused as I am, though. I don't really know why. But anyway, you unfold it like that, and then you can slide it under the door. And if it's a really good day, my video clip will work. Slide it between, up toward the sensor, and the door pops open. Kind of cool. Very useful. Sometimes they adjust that beam outward more so that people like me don't stick coat hangers under the door to open them. Found a solution to that one too. So I use those big balloons that the clowns use at the kids' parties. And you basically slide it between the doors and you use the hand pump and you fill it till it's just about ready to burst and you let go. So on the inside of the door, the balloon does this, and then you hear the click and the door opens. When it doesn't open and you've went through 6 balloons is when you need to start worrying that that's probably not gonna work. Sometimes it's a little bit easier than that. We had a client that installed these types of doors on their pre-production data center because they thought it would be easier for the techs to get in and out with their carts and things without having to worry about holding the door. It's set up to comply with the fire code in the States, but they kind of forgot to make some adjustments to it. So you don't actually have to swipe to open it, you can just push it open. They were not amused. We thought it was great. All right, so the doors themselves, you've got some options. Back to those little access control panels, right? Those tiny little single board computers that are oh so important that nobody really cares about. They have to cache locally all of the access data that's stored on the server. So they have to know exactly what card numbers are allowed entry to what zones and what time. This is really useful for us. If we're doing a test and we're on the inside, one way or another, and we come across these, they can give us a lot of good data. How to find them? A couple different ways. They usually have really bad embedded web servers on them. Very, very limited web servers, but it gets the job done. They usually have FTP open. A lot of them use anonymous FTP for backup, which is kind of cool because not only will it back up its local config, it's usually scripted to call out and send that back to the access control server via anonymous FTP as well. So if you get one, you can kind of figure out the topology for all of them. SNMP write is almost always open on these things too. You can also find them if you're on more of like a blue team defensive side and you're reviewing like Nessus output scans for your environment. You can find them by MAC address. They'll have a similar MAC address that'll be registered to some of the names that I have listed in here later on. But they're really fragile, so be very gentle with them. Sometimes even Nmap will upset them. They usually can't handle a 65K port scan without power cycling a couple of times. Interesting fact about that, when it loses power, all the doors have to fail open. That's an awkward conversation to have. No, I don't know why all the doors are open. Let me go check something. Some of those web servers only work in IE as well, so keep a Windows VM handy just because you might need it sometime. Went through most of this stuff already. Oh yeah, TCP 9999. So for those of you who do work in the critical infrastructure in the SCADA world, that's kind of a favored port for serial to IP converters. These are used in a lot of different things, not just physical access systems, a lot of smart grid and whatnot. But they always sit on 9999, and if you telnet to them, they'll just drop you into the configuration menu because they're very helpful. Just don't change anything, because sometimes you can't get that to change back. We don't normally need to change it, we just need to know what it says, and then we can use it to go a little bit further. We talked about that. A couple of really quick shots of the web interface. So once these things, once you can find access to them, oh, this web interface doesn't have a password, by the way. All you have to do is just browse to port 80. They're kind of like small children. They'll tell you whatever it is that you want to know. So it'll tell you all about its connection path, where it connects to. When there are multiple controllers, usually there is one in a master relationship, just like we do on the IT side, like a master and a secondary. So that the server doesn't have to simultaneously talk to 15 controllers, it talks to 2, and then they spread the policy from there. So it will also happily tell you where it gets its data from. So if you haven't found the physical access server yet, you will probably find it listed in the web interface. It has to cache everything locally so that it understands who's supposed to enter where and what time. Some of that is browsable right in the web server. It's very, very nice. They were really thinking of me when they put this stuff together. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be used for diagnostic testing, but I use it in other ways. It's also nice enough to tell you when the card expires. So if I have a big list of card numbers that I pulled from this source or another source, now I can start to look and figure out which ones are active, which ones are about to expire, which ones are used really often and what time. So I may not be able to directly put a name to it to find out their level of access, but we've got a pretty good start on finding the higher priority ones. There is a tool for hunting the HID lower end door controllers. It's called Vertex. These controllers are not very popular at an enterprise level. They're more meant for smaller businesses that only have between 2 and 4 points that they need to control. But the tool will help you find it, and then it will help you send some easy commands, a couple of UDP packets that will just open everything right up. The server is a little bit more complicated, like I said before, because it's like a 2012 server, it just kind of blends with the rest of them, usually in the same address space as the rest of the server farm. For reasons that I don't exactly understand, people feel the need to name it physical access server in DNS, or secure, or whatever the vendor name is for it. So if you are doing some DNS recon, be sure to do a quick browse through that list to see if there's anything that will lead you to the physical access server if you haven't found it yet. I put some keyword links in here for you so that you can script it, because that's pretty easy to do. And of course, what kind of talk would I be without Shodan? So some of these keywords that I listed here, you can also put into Shodan. Now, why would people have their physical access system on the internet? So a lot of the companies, and not just in the States, it's a little bit everywhere, they don't manage their own physical access system. They pay a vendor to do it. And the vendor can't be bothered to use things like VPNs or two-factor authentication, so they just put it on the internet. So I'll let you find your own fun there. A couple of other resources on the internal network. A lot of these companies, they track their tickets, for lack of a better term, the same way that we do in IT, except for they were never taught not to put the card information in the tickets. So if you find their SharePoint site, and it's probably open, you can see the log of where they destroyed card number such and such for this person and gave them a new card with number such and such. It's very helpful. I like it. It helps me out a lot. And I am almost out of time, so we are going to put this all together. This was an engagement I did a couple of years ago. Medium-sized company, fairly large. We're probably 15 to 2,000 employees, so it's definitely not a mom-and-pop shop down the street. They thought they wanted a physical assessment with a red team as well. So we did some recon. The details on that are a little sketchy. But basically, during the recon, we used Google Street View or the like to look at some of the photos of the outside of the building, and then we could see pictures of the card readers. So once you start to get into this kind of stuff, once you see a picture of the card reader, you kind of get a good idea of the technology that it's using. So then I know what equipment to bring with me, because most of the time I have to travel to get there. So now I don't have to bring 6 long-range readers with me. I can just bring the one that I know I'm going to need. They were really great with wearing their badges and their swag with their company logo plastered all over them outside of the office. So it was very easy to just walk around with the long-range reader in a bag, right? Messenger bag, nothing suspicious, and just gather card data all day. There was a main entrance for the visitors that we noticed that everybody kind of disappeared from around 4 o'clock. So we took the card data that we collected with the long-range reader. We made some cards, a couple, and then sent people in one at a time to test them at that point. So once everybody was gone for the day, we just entered with the cards that we knew unlocked the main door there in the visitor area and took a look at the workstation that they used to access the physical access server. I didn't even talk about those. We'll get to that. They don't lock those up, so it's just a tower on the floor. So we went a little old school, found some hardware keyloggers. I actually had to go find a PS2 one. That's not an accurate picture. They didn't even have a USB keyboard. Yeah, it's great technology. $15 million system, and they don't have a USB keyboard. So we basically left those down there for a few days. We waited till 4 o'clock a few days later, went back in, retrieved that. Now, not only did that give us credentials for the physical access system, but that also gave us enterprise credentials, right? Because they have to log into the domain in the morning before they get started. So we've got lots and lots of useful sets of credentials. They have enterprise wireless. That is not pre-shared key. So you use your enterprise credentials to connect to the enterprise wireless, which is available from the parking lot, by the way. So they got a little bit of a wireless assessment along with this. Now, back to physical access companies not really being security companies. They decided that, installing physical access software on all of the guards' machines was a lot of work, so they made a mobile app. Yeah, a mobile app for the physical access system. You can download it. It's in the Play Store. It's in the Apple Store. Just look it up. You can put it on your phone. But you have to be authenticated to the domain, so there's no way that anybody would ever get in. So from the parking lot, we used our collected domain credentials from our keylogger, logged in that way, installed the mobile app for free, and then authenticated, and then basically had complete control of the physical access system from the parking lot. So once you have complete access to this, you can unlock doors at random times or whenever you feel like it. When the guard pushes the button and the door clicks open, that's controlled out of the physical access system. So with this, we didn't even really need at this point to have our team members with valid ID cards. We would just wait for them to get close to the door and then press the release button for that door, and then they could just walk all the way into the data center. So we were amused, they were not. But I think it definitely painted a very clear picture of we have several problems in physical access, and it's not just one area. So I know that we've got a lot of catching up to do on it, and there's going to be some education that needs to go along with. But most of the stuff is just misconfigurations. And really, if you go to IT, this is like late 90s kind of mistakes. So it's definitely fixable. We just have to figure out a good process for that. So I have a PAC security checklist that's just about ready for release. It's in draft internally right now that we're going to make available for free so that we can really start to begin a dialogue internally between physical security and IT security to try to get everybody involved. So if you're interested in that, or if you have ideas for it, please feel free. There's my email, there's my Twitter. If you want on the release list, just drop me a line, and I'll put you on the draft release list and let you know when it comes out. And I got the STFU sign, so I guess it's break time, and I'll be available out front. Thanks so much.